All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Entrepreneurial Development Podcast. I'm your host, C. Muzan. Have another great guest here with me. This gentleman and I just got connected through a mutual friend. Mutual friend wound up reaching out to me and said, "Hey, I got this really smart guy. He's an IP lawyer, right? He's a good friend of mine, and we got a chance to talk. And he really wants to jump into the podcasting world. And I know that you have a podcast." I was like, absolutely, I'll have him on. Cameron and I had a good conversation, about 30 minutes over the phone. And for sure, I knew that he was somebody that I had to put on the podcast so that he could get a chance to, share his story a bit more. So Mr. Cameron Tousi, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
Absolutely. So we just get started right away here, just jumping right in. So for the entrepreneurial community, right, let's start. Take us back, Cameron. Give us the origin story, kind of where did you come from? Where did you grow up? How did you get to this stage in your business career? Start with the origin story.
Okay, so I'll go back to college. I can always
go back.
But basically, I was a double E, electrical engineering and math major, which I did, math and those kinds of things always came fairly easy to me, but I always wanted to add more liberal arts to what I did. Now, when I was coming up through the ranks, Chris, it's like we're talking late 80s. So, computers were a new thing,
Sure.
We had mainframe computers, but, that was the place to be if you wanted to get some kind of a job, like a decent job. So I did the major. I came out. I worked in industry for a couple of years. I was at IBM, and I was at Booz Allen Hamilton as a consultant. And that's where I learned about the world of patents. And so, I didn't have any kind of a lifelong calling to be a lawyer, but it kind of mixed with the idea that I was mixing with technology, what I really cared about, what was really interesting to me. Yeah. So law had a very much of a pragmatic side to it for me to go into. And since then, it's been about 2.5 decades that I've worked doing intellectual property law, business law. I do a lot of litigation, licensing. Again, I started from the patent angle. And that was because my first position was working at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, after I had been an engineer.
Gotcha.
And it was a great way for me to get to understand the industry and learn about the nuances and things. Up until then, it was like patent law was like, wow, what's this stuff? I thought about it the same way as most normal people think about it.
Yeah.
But then I got into it, and it's been a really wild ride. I mean, I've represented, hundreds of companies, both the biggest companies you can think of, as well as the smallest mom and pop, individuals who are looking to get into business, get their trademark, get their patent protection, to, the world's largest corporations that, have enormous resources when it comes to being able to get, all their contracts done, et cetera.
Sure. So
in
take
2012,
me, Cam, real quick, take me a step back. So let's start at that college point, right? So you're you said electrical engineering, correct?
That's right.
Electrical engineering. And at the time you said computers were just starting to pick up a bit. And that was the place that you felt your skill set lied. You saw the money. Tell me your mindset at that time.
Yeah, I started as a biology major, and I really got into engineering as a pragmatic thing, because I just saw the world was really changing in those days.
Sure.
Microsoft was not really yet Microsoft. He was. I was working at IBM, as a matter of time, just before, at that time, before it got its, lunch stolen by Microsoft.
Sure.
And you didn't, the PCs were really nothing. The only computers that were used were like these huge mainframe computers that, hundreds of people worked on, et cetera. Everybody had a little bit of bandwidth. One of my friends, as a matter of fact, in those days had the novel idea of having a PC network I was like, you only patented that, you know?
Right.
I mean, it's like everything in the world now is a PC network.
Exactly.
So he used to walk around about thinking, I have this great idea for a PC network, you know?
Where's that guy at now? Do you ever do you ever reach
He's a
out to him?
consultant and he's doing well for himself, but he didn't make the billions of dollars that he should have made.
Man, he's shooting himself at, like, man, really kicking himself right now, huh?
That's exactly right. But so it was so interesting that, when I was studying engineering, to give you an idea, I was here at University of Maryland in the Washington, D.C. area. And a lot of people who study at Maryland, they get jobs at some of the, as you can think of, like the Boeings and, very large contractors. Right. And defense contractors, those tend to be some of the biggest jobs. And what was shocking to me was that, like, NASA was hiring electrical engineers over aerospace engineers. My friends who were aerospace engineers couldn't get a job, but everybody wanted electrical engineers or computer. Computer science was still relatively new in the 80s as a new department in colleges, which is, it sounds shocking now, but it really was. So you could go into the engineering route or computer science. I had some of those types of classes by the time I graduated. And then I took that first job coming out at IBM, working down in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina.
Gotcha.
And that was in the telecom space. So.
Got you. So really, you just saw that that's the way the world was moving, right? You just were able to
absolutely.
See it.
Exactly. It was really at the very beginning, where, computers, because before that, if you think of it, they weren't as big a part of your life, especially before the internet. We're talking years before the internet.
Right.
The internet just about 95 or 96, I'd already been practicing in as a lawyer. But around that time, you started just having this big dissemination of information. And from then on, it's just a completely different world than it used to be.
Absolutely.
We didn't have cell phones.
Right, exactly. Right.
Cell phones just came out.
Cell phones are just coming out, right? Like, that's a whole different world. And, like, to be able to, bring context to even some of the people listening that may not even understand that world. They don't understand this pre-internet, pre-computer world. Right. I think the biggest thing that anybody can take is your ability to see that this is the way things are headed, right? We're not, even though this is how the world was, the rise of computers, the rise of technology, really, bigger companies starting to see it, but you being able to see it in college, saying, this is the route I'm pretty sure that's going to be bigger, says something about your mindset as an entrepreneur, as someone that's built a business or built a firm, built an agency. And I think a lot of people that are coming up now need to understand that it's our job to see where the world is moving and what we're moving towards. At the time of recording this, the COVID pandemic is happening, and understanding that the world's going to be completely different after this time. And the entrepreneurs and the people that really understand what the changes are going to be and kind of move towards those changes will be successful. So it's obvious that you've had this for a long time, right?
Oh, yes, that's true. And it's actually a really great point, because when you're talking about entrepreneurism, I think it's a lot of people from a young age, they just have a big interest in starting their own company and, making it and working with others and building something that no one's seen before, Right. And I had those, a lot of those thoughts when I was little, even in high school and everything. I really wanted to be that entrepreneur. It was exciting for me. So that's something that I just had in my blood from when I was young till now. That hasn't changed. So even as a lawyer, when I'm looking at opportunities of my clients, it's like I'm thinking about it in the same vein. I always tend to put myself there, and I tend to ask questions as though I were the business owner. I've had businesses in the past, have been fortunate to have some very successful ones, and in those businesses, it's extremely nice to have that kind of empathy from the professionals that you're involved with. Whether it's your lawyers, your accountants, your finance people, your creatives, it makes a big difference because, especially like, for example, think for example, if you have an invention and you were speaking with me, one thing that we encourage people to do at my law firm is IP law leaders. One thing that we encourage people to do at IP law leaders is all of our attorneys who happen to be very experienced. I like to have people who are experienced like myself, but we encourage a lot of brainstorming with our inventors to try to flush out more and more so we can put more into the specification and have different embodiments and have a bigger scope of claim coverage, which gives you more protection, right? Absolutely. But the more of that you put in, because remember, with a patent, for example, you don't have to worry about implementing every single thing that's thought of there. As long as a person of regular skill in your field would be able to get it, you can put those ideas on paper. And those ideas can have, vast value for you. If you're talking to an attorney who's working with you, you might want someone who's, like yourself or me, for example, who's more entrepreneurial, who's really putting themselves in your shoes, who's brainstorming with you, who's got a lot of different ideas. They may be, trying to contribute if they can, or at least see if you can segue those ideas into their invention.
Absolutely.
That's kind of a very positive kind of a thing. I'm
Absolutely.
just one real life example.
Yeah, and those and I'm glad you're giving it, because those are the real examples that people need, right? A lot of times that when people are getting started off, they don't even know that they need a professional like you, right? They don't even know that they need a patent attorney. They don't know that they need someone to help them with their intellectual property. And a lot of entrepreneurs try to go at it themselves, not knowing that it's the team that they need to be able to really pull all those things together. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. I want people to understand that are looking for patents or, going that path to get some value from it. But let me take you a step back again in your journey, because I think your journey is so important for people to understand. Like it's not about where you start, right? As long as you're going down that path and you're, kind of weaving your way, you're going to find out where you need to be. So from college, what made the jump from the electrical engineer to law school to saying, okay, I think law is the way to go?
Well, I had heard about the field of intellectual property and patent law. I didn't know that much about it. And
how did you hear about it, right? Like, how did just from?
It's kind of word of mouth. A lot of some friends that I had who would basically talk to me about it, but I didn't know. I met one person who was actually working in the field, and he told me, how it works. And it was, again, you have to always remember to reach out and meet as many people as you can and get as many ideas as you can. Because it's doubtful if I hadn't met him. His name is Pat Muir, by the way. If I had met Pat, I may not have gone into the IP field, because he sort of gave me a roadmap. He said, okay, you want to get your base experience even before you start law school, maybe go to the patent office, et cetera. And it happened that I worked at the same place as Patrick's. His supervisor hired me right before he was leaving to go to a law firm.
Wow. So is that how? So that's how you. So
I got like all Patrick's cases, So
is that how you met Pat? Like, you were coming in as he was going out? Is that how you guys initially knew each other?
Well, I'd met him beforehand, and he actually took my resume to his boss, who ended up being one of the best bosses I ever had, Jerry Smith, over at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Very well known, very well respected. Yeah. He also worked as a judge, and a lot of people who were judges used to do work for him as an examiner. But it's just an ultimately great person. Kind of shy though, because I got the offer. I was working at Booz Allen, and I got an offer in the mail before interviewing. I hadn't even interviewed. I'm like, this cannot be. I'm like, why am I getting something from the patent office? Because it looked like, I was expecting like a rejection letter or something, because I hadn't heard for it forever. Yeah. And I opened it up like, congratulations, you got it. I'm like, that's what? Funny. So that was shocking. Then I learned later that, a lot of times in the government, they have, it's very difficult for them to hire, but then when they do hire, the floodgates open, they want to hire,
Sure.
but Jerry hired me without an interview.
That's funny. Just
Good thing he ended up liking me. So
apparently, right? Good thing you were good at what you did, right? Because otherwise, that would have not been the best hire, I guess. So,
yes, especially since I was coming in, I'd already had industry experience and something that the patent office was looking more for. And we find that, especially with IP lawyers and things, we like to have people with industry experience in various areas of the law. It just makes a big difference. Just kind of the same as, you know, why a lot of schools want you to work in industry for a few years before you get your MBA, you know. Right. That experience means a lot, and you bring that additional those factors in with you, you know?
Sure, that makes sense. That makes sense. And to go back to the point that you made for, again, the listeners and people that are in the journey, right? How important it is to just reach out, have that phone call, right? Have that meeting, connect with that person. Because just like you said, had it not been for, was it Peter? Was Peter his name?
His name was Patrick Muir.
Patrick, there we go, Patrick. Yeah. So had it not been for you reaching out and you know, having that conversation with Patrick, you don't even know if you would have been down this niche and been in the IP, been in the patent side. So again, the serendipity of just little things, little moments of action that change the destiny, right? Change our future, change our trajectory of our career. That's just another example. You're just another testimony of somebody that it just happened like that, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's amazing. Some of the most important things that happen to us are, you know, serendipity, what have you, like getting married, for instance, you know, the most important decision in your life. Right. And you may, by accident, you may meet someone and, you know, that, you know, maybe you were 10 minutes late and, you know, you were standing on a platform and that's how you met your future spouse. Right. I mean, those are just incredible things about the human experience. But I think you also have to remember that you have to just, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you have to reach out. Yeah. I think you have to talk to anybody who will give you advice. Yeah. You know, give everybody a couple of minutes, you know, reach out and sort of shape it into your own reality. You know, like, for example, what in this case, we're talking about one friend, but, you know, it could be in any kind of, with any kind of a background, and it could be wherever you're coming to it from, you know, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're, you know, a mid-level executive, you have to just keep your eyes and ears open. It helps you so much in life. It's the equivalent of a huge amount of intelligence, I think. Absolutely. Just being able to have those communications.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, right? Like, I try to press people on that a lot, of just reaching out, just have the conversation, have the meeting. You never know where it's going to take you. You never know where it's going to go or lead you. So again, in super agreement on that one. Keep going down your path now for, now you're into the patent world, right? That was the first step, right, in the patent world. What were your first initial thoughts? Were you good at it? Was it a natural thing that clicked for you? How was that transition?
Honestly, I looked at it. I got you had when I was a patent examiner, you had a patent examiner internal training, PEIT. Okay. And after a couple of days of, you know, learning as much as they want to teach you about patent law, you know, to be a good examiner, then you go back to your art unit, which is where you're going to be working. And I think they sent my first case. And I looked at it, I read it 100 times. I couldn't understand what in the heck was going on. I was like, what is this thing? And then they have you work with, you know, it was a claim for a numerically controlled machine, which are machines that they have a lot of them in Japan, for example, that, you know, are used in processing and manufacturing, et cetera. Yeah. But from reading this claim, you wouldn't know what the heck it was. I don't care. I mean, I read it 20 times, and then I sat with, and it might have been with Patrick, and I said, "What is this? Please explain this to me. I'm supposed to examine this." And, you know, you're so junior at that level, you have to have some more senior people examine it. And then he read it 5 times, and then he said, right, "Okay, I think it's kind of like when you're doing this, you're doing that." You know, it's got this cryptic stuff. Right. And I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? I had a perfectly good job at Booz Allen. I knew everything that was going on.
Yeah.
But you know, like anything else, Chris, you have to you have to just adapt and you learn, and you just have to keep an open mind and an open heart about it. And I end up being a great examiner, at least in my view. I certainly was. I was very careful about, you know, what I allowed and what I didn't. I reviewed every claim. And a lot of, you find a lot of people who are interested in going to law school end up being very good examiners. In fact, at the time I was mentioning my boss, Jerry Smith, he used to say that, you know, the people who want to go to law school, they go there for like 2 years where they get the experience, and they jump off to a law firm and work as an associate or student associate and stuff. Right. But they use it as kind of a springboard. And it's something that traditionally the patent office isn't really crazy about, you know, training you all this time just to lose you. Right. But he said, it just gives you a lot of insight about him. He said that I would rather have the person who's really good, who really cares, and have him for 2 years versus someone who doesn't really care about their job and does it for 20 years. Absolutely. You know? And so those were very powerful words for me, and I couldn't agree more. And I felt like I took that with me when I moved on and worked at law firms. And the next thing for me was, since I bet my whole life on this, which entrepreneurs will do sometimes, right, is getting into law school. I mean, it wasn't a foregone conclusion, you know, right, especially around here. They're not. Everybody wants to go to law school in the Washington, D.C. area. So then it was just a matter of, you know, being diligent and taking the LSAT and doing all the things you need. But, you know, there come times in your life that you really have to, you put everything on the line and you say, I'm really going to go for it. I may lose, but I'm going to do everything I can in order to make it. Absolutely. And I was fortunate that I did. So.
Absolutely. And that's a lesson to all the people that start businesses and entrepreneurs. At some point, you just got to put it on the line, right? You just got to put it on the line and just say, hey, I'm headed in this direction. That's the way we're going. So you transition out now. When did you start your own firm? Because that was the next step, right? Is you started your own firm?
No, I mean, starting my own firm was in 2012. So I worked for many years at large firms in the Washington, D.C. area. And those are really great training grounds. I mean, think of a doctor getting an internship, right? You know, you want that doctor to have been an intern for a number of years before they're practicing. And so that's what a lot of the firms do for you. They give you that experience, but at the same time, they get a lot out of you, just like you get out of the intern.
Absolutely.
So, you know, that's what that experience was. And then I end up being a, you know, senior of counsel at one of the bigger firms in DC. And by 2012, I said, you know, I want to do my own thing. It was actually 2010 when I first started. I got in with one of my ex-colleagues as a partner. And then 2 years later, I made it my own thing, just so I could, you know, and teamed up with a couple of other folks, just so. And at that time, it was, you know, the thought was really that, you know, I really want this to work the way I want it to work. Sure. So a little bit of that is this kind of entrepreneurial, like, you know, kind of doing it my way. Sure. But it's a difference in vision. Like if you have partners, I felt like I wanted to have more access to clients and individuals and bring in more parties and stuff. And so that worked a lot better for me.
Did you always kind of have that mindset, even when you were working for larger companies? Did you know eventually it was going to lead to you breaking out and doing your own thing? Or were you just kind of open to whichever way the career path took you?
Well, that's a really good question. I can tell you, and let's just think of me as a typical entrepreneur. A lot of times people who want to form their own businesses are never really completely satisfied working for someone else. Absolutely. You know? And it can be, and I don't want to be too weird about it, but I mean, for example, it can be being a partner that you want to be, or being part of a smaller organization. That could be kind of your dream. Sure. It doesn't have to be such that, you know, it's just you're the one who's running the show. But when you're part of like a big firm and everything, you don't feel like you have that ability. Right. And it's funny, the attorneys that work with us, they tend to be the same way. They're very entrepreneurial minded. You know, they worked at the big firms. Now they want to spend more time doing their own thing, and also opening up new avenues. And those new avenues are being able to work with individuals or smaller companies or mid-sized companies, something that's not as attractive for a big firm because they're always, you know, looking for the very high dollars. So, and, you know, it comes with a sacrifice is what I'm saying, but it's very rewarding.
Absolutely.
You know, you can still do quite well.
Right.
And we've been very fortunate, but what I'm saying is it's still very, it's still kind of a different experience, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm always curious, you know, to figure out that mix because, you know, to me, Cameron, you sound 100% like an entrepreneur, right? Like just born and raised as an entrepreneur. And just like you said, I know for most entrepreneurs, true entrepreneurs, it's really tough to work for somebody else. Like you said, you're just not fully fulfilled. There always feels like there's something missing when you're working for someone else, when you really know you could do it, you can handle it, you have a bigger vision, you have things that you want to see come to life. And so I'm always curious at how long someone lasts in that environment. You know, our mutual friend, right, Terrell, we have a podcast. We had a podcast episode where we talked about the intrapreneur, right? We talked about the person that has entrepreneurial tendencies, but brings that to corporate America or to a larger company and still is able to maneuver. And him and I kind of went back and forth on that podcast. And I said, I don't believe that really exists, because if you're truly an entrepreneur, you really can't live in someone else's shadow forever. You can't live in a company for 25, 30 years and call yourself an entrepreneur. So, you know, he was the other way. He was like, no, because he feels like he is. He's like, no, I'm an entrepreneur, but I have these entrepreneurial tendencies, but I believe I can make a company get to where they need to be by thinking differently, by going that route. And it's always curious. I'm always curious to hear people's mix of, can you be a full entrepreneur and still work inside someone else's company or not? And it sounds like, you know, you had your expiration date too.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. And I'm not sure which way I would come down on those two, because there's a lot of people that feel like and they're very entrepreneurial, they get the satisfaction they need from their employer. Mm. But I would say there are employers and there are employers. Like, for example, just this podcast that you and I are doing, since it's my own firm, I don't have to worry about it. You know, if I were working at a big firm, I'd have to get a clearance. You know, everything is like that, whether you want to do marketing or whether you want to have some outreach. Let's say you want to put together some kind of a program where you help like needy kids learn more about your profession, you know. Right. All these kinds of things, you've got to get cleared, et cetera. And then there's this kind of hierarchy, and you have to be there to do that. And what it does is, particularly young people, today's young people, mm-hmm. they want that kind of freedom. They want the freedom for, you know, to be on social. That part of their lives, I think, has to be mixed or intermingled with their work to make a satisfied, happy person, you know. Absolutely. Even more so than when I was younger, coming up through the ranks, right?
Absolutely.
I just think it's important. And I think it can add a lot. Mm-hmm. It can add enormous amounts. So if you're going to be treating, you know, what you don't want is a place that treats you as a cog, you know, that's replaceable, work as many hours as possible.
Right.
What you want is a company or a firm that gives you that type of those possibilities to be able to have some independence of what you do. You know, give you the ability to fail a few times. You know, just like a lot of our colleagues who are VCs on the West Coast, they like to see entrepreneurs who have failed a few times because they know they've learned a lot from that experience. And if you're a big corporation that's risk averse and you don't want to give those opportunities, that's a big problem for you, you know? Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, but I think that it can be an enormous advantage if you give them those kinds of freedoms. If you stop being penny wise and dollar foolish, I think it can go far. I mean, a lot of companies, for example, will look at employees that are doing some social networking, et cetera.
Yeah.
while they're working, and they see that as a negative thing. That can be a huge thing. It can be a very positive thing, but they think, well, that's subtracting from the total number of hours that I'm getting from you, et cetera.
Right.
Meanwhile, I mean, that person is accountable in any case for the 40, 50, 60, however many hours a week that we keep sucking out of people,
Exactly. Exactly.
So you have to just, look at it that way, I think. Just
Absolutely.
be open, give people that type of freedom. And if you treat everybody like an entrepreneur or a, what's a good word for it? Like a stakeholder in your business.
Absolutely.
If you treat people like that, you'll be surprised what you can get from them.
I believe it. I believe it. Is that how you kind of shaped your firm now? How did you get your team together?
That's exactly right. I mean, I bring people who are very experienced and very entrepreneurial into our mix, and I don't, there are people who have a certain way of doing things. Okay, I get that, but you have to be flexible. You have to be open. You have to be willing to actually listen to clients. Sometimes they have different needs and different requests. Sometimes you don't necessarily do it the same way you've always done it. I think that kind of openness and that adaptability are really important traits. So if I can get a lawyer who's got 2 decades or, at least maybe 1 to 3 decades of experience or so, right? Because I know they've been doing this and they know what they're doing, and they're adaptable, and they're open, and they're entrepreneurial. It's going to be a very ideal person for me to work with. Everybody gets, full respect. Everybody is, transparent. See, one of the things you have to realize is there are many law firms that from the time that you come in as an associate, they're always kind of protecting their clients, and they're terrified. They go, actually talk to a client,
Sure.
so you know what I mean? So when that client is that partner's baby and everything. And it's, if you need to talk to them, you talk to me first, et cetera.
Right.
So basically, how does that person feel as an associate? They're just, working for you without ever even meeting the client, knowing what the real needs are, et cetera. And this kind of thing happens in management, as you well know. Mm-hmm. It's like that kind of access is really important. Now, I've also worked at firms where they were truly open about that. They're like, we want you to work with every client and get to know every client. It's important.
Sure.
I was at a law firm, Stern Kessler. They're just like that. I was like, wow, I can't believe this. It's like, you want me to, yes, but I'm a junior associate, It's like, yes, we want you to work with a client. They wanted me to, in those days, I was, flying to Silicon Valley to meet with inventors and things when I was doing patent law in this earlier days. This is a long time ago in the mid 90s. But that type of a company that gives you access and also is willing to invest in you, like, for example, and I don't want to denigrate companies or anything, but one thing that I noticed was when I was working at IBM, and this was before being a programmer was the coolest thing you could do in the world.
Yeah. Right.
Before that,
Right.
So when I was working at IBM there, I thought, if you want to get like a master's degree or something, so for self-improvement, you had to be there a certain number of years. You had to, get in certain reviews. It took years and all this kind of stuff. When I moved to Booz Allen here in the DC area, from day one, they wanted for me to get a master's if I wanted it, because they're like, this is good because our interests were aligned together, and that if I did better, or let's say I got more advanced degrees while I was on my job, then they could basically sell me better to a client, and they could, it's a benefit to their client.
Sure. And
so they were willing to make the investment in you. No questions asked.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the difference between employers. Now, IBM, to be fair to them, they were a huge organization then. They may be completely different then than they are now.
Sure.
But just in general, it's like you want a corporation that'll give you that independence, whose interests are aligned with you, that when they benefit you, it helps them. I think if you give all those kinds of things to people that they really want, that an entrepreneur wants, I think they might be quite satisfied working at a corporation.
Quite
If it's the right
possible.
corporation.
Yeah, if it's the right one.
Take Terrell's side.
I think, yeah, right. I hear it, but again, you could be right, right? But then the question always becomes, is that leader, is that organization really going to continue to keep bending? Because we know as the entrepreneur, that's what we do. We're constantly changing, and we need that change. We need to stay on our toes. And can an organization be that flexible to really meet the needs, right? Ideally, it would make sense if you could meet the needs of the entrepreneur, you can keep them. But I just don't know that that's fitting in most company structures, that they can really adapt that way,
Yeah, that's true. And to even further support your point, there have been lots of corporate takeovers, or a lot of times companies get from some kind of their private placements or their venture firms that put an enormous amount of capital in a company.
Sure.
But they want, they get that out.
Right.
So what happens is workers, all of a sudden, they have to work harder. They don't get some of the benefits they wanted or that they had. They might not get some, which, hard work is fine, but benefit them, give those people the openness, et cetera. So I guess what I'm saying is, with what I've seen in modern businesses, particularly with a lot of the venture money coming in, it has made the work environment a little bit less entrepreneurial. Sure. And those are things that are not in your hands, which, as you know, an entrepreneur can't stand,
Right, exactly.
It's like one day you're working, everything's fantastic, you're reaching out to people and everything. The next minute you're like, sit at your desk and give me 100 hours.
Right.
So that's not fun.
That's always tough. But again, finding the right company is always going to be important for the entrepreneur. A little bit about now you and your expertise in the patent law, trademark side, right? That's all in there?
Yes, and business. See, I started off especially on the IP side. Mm-hmm. Intellectual property is patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets.
Gotcha.
Okay? And those, and to varying degrees, all those areas, a lot of us IP folks do work in. And early on, it's more in the procurement realm of that, getting patents for people, et cetera. I still do some of that. And in fact, I still do a lot of it, but as your work progresses, you tend to do more licensing, litigation, which the licensing I actually started doing when I was fairly early in my career. Yeah. And when I, from the licensing litigation, you sort of see all the different angles of it. And when you combine the business, when you're helping form startups, particularly startups and smaller businesses, where everything from helping form them to understanding their employment contracts to, all the base type of contracts that are involved in the formation, and seeing how important the IP is to them. This sort of goes into a bundle and a mix. And that's really the areas that we focused on when at least I wanted to focus on when I formed the firm in 2012.
Got it. So as far as somebody that is out there just kind of getting started, or they've had their idea of their, I don't know, right? Their thing that they're trying to patent, or they're thinking about that this is just going to be the biggest idea out there. What are their first couple steps? Should they reach out to you first? Should they design it first? For someone in like the infancy stages, what would you tell them their kind of next step should be?
Well, I'd say on the legal side, you got to make sure that your corporation's formed, right? And you want to make sure that you have the various kinds of licenses, et cetera, that you need. And you want to have some baseline protection of your intellectual property. So they can reach out to someone like me or someone like me, and, get some of that sort of help and the hand-holding that they're going to need early on. It's also good to look at networks of other business people. If you're doing, if you're creating technology, it's not bad to get involved with some of the inventors networks. And basically, like we were talking about before, get as many of those kinds of contacts as you can, people willing to help you, work with you, et cetera, and you're helping them as well, right? So, you know, between that and reaching out to some of the professionals like myself, I think that gives you a very good, you know, helpful um, place to go. What one thing is, I mean, not to, like I said, I believe in big firms. I think that they're the best training ground for attorneys. But it's quite difficult for someone who's new to be able to afford that. And one thing that happens is sometimes they go to maybe their family lawyer who may not know as much about, you know, technology or IP law, et cetera. And that's kind of the sweet spot that I felt that I found with our firm. And I was looking to go after because you know, the only issue is, you know, you ask like, will they ever find me? Well, anyway, other than this podcast, I don't know how they'll ever find me. But
we're going to change that for you, Cam. We're going to change that. We're going to
thank you.
It. You're welcome.
So, but you know, that's kind of the thing, you know, the whole, like, if I build it, you know, will they come? Right. Those are some of the places to start. But I think you start with reaching out to friends, to networks, you know, looking at those who are closest to you. You know, I mean, a lot of times those people, I mean, this is really funny in law that I mentioned. You know, it used to be when we first started, you'll see my point in a couple minutes. Yeah. But when we first started, I thought, well, I got to be really nice to all these big shot partners. You know, when I was early on as a lawyer, I thought, oh my God, they have to like me and I have to do everything they want, et cetera. And I realized this many years later, the most important relationships were really with the other people who were associates.
Sure.
You know, they're all running all the firms around.
Yeah.
But the fact is, but because you're working with them closely, there's a camaraderie that you establish with them that you're not really going to do with, you know, establish very easily with someone who's older than you are, is in a different position, may not have the same interests, et cetera. Right. Absolutely. And I think that entrepreneurs ought to really be thinking the same way, which is, you know, you're going to a particular university that's good in technology. You know, meet up with some of the other folks. Look for other entrepreneurs around you. Look for groups. And nowadays online, especially with COVID-19, it's got to be online, right? But there's a lot of ways and a lot of opportunities to meet. And you know, like the guys who formed started Airbnb. Okay. They were working in design at a school in Rhode Island, I think. Wow. They were classmates. You know, that's sometimes, you know, where they come from. Yeah. You know, I don't know about you, but like if I watch a movie, I notice, I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you see two people in a movie, then you'll see the same two people in like 10 other movies. Because that's, you know, they made the relationship there. And then a lot of times they get married that way too, by the way, married, divorced, whatever. But they'll start with like that one relationship that they have. And then, you know, well, we like working with each other. Let me get you involved in my next project.
Adam Sandler.
It's right in front of your face.
Adam Sandler's known for that. Adam Sandler.
Oh my God, yes.
Like he said, like all of the people that he grew up in stand-up and did the comedy with, and Chris Rock and all of them, he just brought them into all of his movies, even to this day, because that's the group that were, you know, kind of going together, grinding together on their path together. And man, you hit the nail on the head, Cameron. That's so important. I wish more entrepreneurs understood that, because honestly, I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand that. They try to come at it from a very self-employed way of like, I know I can go like my own way, but that camaraderie, that what I call mastermind group, right? People that are like-minded, that are in the same kind of niche as you and just going in that direction, to be able to pull on them 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when you both get to a level of, you know, some type of significance in your industry or in your field, that's when you have a real network. That's when you can really build. And that's the thing I'm always looking for. And I always try to teach other younger entrepreneurs that are just starting. I said, start to build your network, support other entrepreneurs that are grinding the way you are getting after it the way you are. Support them, because when you all make it to the top, that's when you have an extraordinary network that you can then reach back, right? Have a ton of resources. And that's really what it's about. That old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. So important, so important. But again, I don't think a lot of people understand it that way.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and I think it's incredibly it's a true story as well. I mean, as you live your life, you start seeing more and more of that, as you get
Yeah.
older, and you see, okay, these are the relationships that were the most important in my life. A friend that I had in high school,
Right.
um, and so. And those relationships come with you to the workplace, and those relationships are incredibly important if you're looking to grow, if you're looking to be an entrepreneur, because you'll want to reach out and form relationships with people that you know and trust. Trust is a big part of it, but what they know you, you know them, they know your strengths, and weaknesses, and vice versa. And with that comes just this incredible ability to just sort of gestalt your way into a very successful kind of a future. And I think it's not, I think partly because, we sort of have a certain news coverage of the way things are versus the way they really are.
Sure.
And, according to media, it's kind of like, oh, this person came up with this great idea and boom, they were a zillionaire,
Right.
And it didn't happen that way. They had a million failures. They had friends that they allied with and people that were with them through thick and thin. They had, valleys and peaks, and then they got to where they want to be. And I think that's a really important lesson for people, because if you're looking at that storybook that comes from the media a lot of times, I think you're with your first failure, you're going to quit. And that's just what you cannot do. Expect failures and learn from them. And if you don't have failures, it means you're not doing something right. Just like I tell a lot of entrepreneurs, like, if you haven't been fired, you're not doing something right.
It's so true. That's so true. We're willing to get fired all the time, failing all the time, right? Like that's just, it becomes our nature. It just becomes our nature. So good. Hey, we're going to get this thing wrapped up. Cameron, tell the people kind of where can they find you? Is there a certain place to reach out to you, whether it's email or social? Where can people get in touch with you?
Okay, the easiest way is to go to our law firm's website, which is IP Law Leaders, IPLAWLEADERS. And if you can fill out a contact form, or you can reach out to me directly by email, Cameron, CAMERON, at iplawleaders.com. We have a Facebook page. We also have YouTube page and other social media.
Soon to be
I promise to be
coming, right?
Soon to be podcasts, and I promise to be more involved with them.
That's right. That's right. They're actually going to talk to you. So again, you've been incredibly insightful. For any of the listeners or people that are tuning into this or picking this up, again, reach out to Cameron. He is an expert in his field, in the IP field. So if you have any of those questions, I'm sure he's more than willing, or any of his team more than willing, to be able to help you out, point you in the right direction, or at least give you the resource or whatever you need to get your question answered and really start on your path. Again, you've heard he's already entrepreneurial, just like the rest of us. So we want to be able to be a part of this community and help other entrepreneurs get to where they want to be. So Cameron, we really, really do appreciate having you on the show. Anything that you ever need, feel free to reach back out. But again, we appreciate having you on.
Thank you, Chris. It was my pleasure to be on, and thanks for your words of wisdom.
Absolutely.
I'll remember them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to everybody that's listening, we're signing off on another Entrepreneurial Development Podcast. Stay well. We'll talk to you soon.